Hey, everybody.
And we are up on YouTube. We're just missing council members Appel and Shade. And I think Amy is still trying to connect.
Okay. We definitely want to wait for her to get connected. Councilmember Appel is now with us.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
Appel, we have Sheely, Gregory, Waring. Thank you all for joining us, and staff and guests. So if we're up on YouTube, I'd like to go ahead and call this Budget Advisory Committee to order. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We're good to proceed, Jennifer?
Yes, sir.
I got the message, recording in progress, although we're not going to get far with the meeting without Amy on board because she's got the PowerPoint presentation. So
Matt Froelich is signing on now too.
and Matt Froelich is signing on. Good. Okay. Matt, are you with us? Matt Froelich? Is Amy around?
Matt, you're on mute. My guess is he's probably talking to Amy.
No, we're in my conference room. We're having some technical difficulties right away because Matt Fallon is here with us as well. So sorry, everyone.
Okay. Oh, there you are.
Sorry.
I
Okay.
can see you both together. Okay. We're good to go. I hope we'll call this meeting to order, and I would ask everyone to join me in a reflection on this National Day of Prayer, to count our many blessings that God has given us and to pray for peace in this world, particularly in Ukraine and in that part of the world. A moment of silence, please. Amen, and thank you very much. So as you know, really the whole singular purpose of this meeting today is to talk about our drainage fund and drainage project allocation, and importantly, to talk about those future projects and how we might prioritize them and make sure we've got a path forward to pay for them is very importantly. So without further ado, I'm just going to go right ahead and pass this over to Amy. She's got an excellent PowerPoint presentation with a lot of information. And Amy just asked, I know some of us have to get going in a little bit, but please take your time, and we're not in a hurry. Let's take our time so we can answer questions as we go, and then have time for discussion afterwards, particularly on the prioritization of projects. Amy?
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say too, Matt Fallon is here with me, Matt Froelich is here with me, and Councilmember Shade just walked in, Jennifer, because he was having some technical difficulty as well. So I have all of them here with me in my conference room. So we're here to talk about the drainage fund. And we'll talk about the current project allocations that we have in the drainage fund right now. So the first project is Forest Acres. Total project budget right now, as we know it, is $21 million. And you can see the funding sources for that project. Only $205,000 is coming from the drainage fund. But as it stands right now, we only have 18.5 million allocated, and we have a shortfall of $2.4 million, almost $2.3 million. And please tell me to, stop me if you have questions. Next is Market Street, $23.3 million project. We have $17.5 million allocated right now. You can see all the different funding sources. 3.9 of that is in the drainage fund, and we have right now a $5.7 million funding shortage. We're expecting the project to start in 2023. Next is September Clark. This is fully funded, mostly with state infrastructure bank money and also our King Street Gateway TIF. And that's both phases 4 and 5. Church Creek is a $5.7 million project, $3.6 million of that coming from the drainage fund. And we have had some NIFWIF grants for the project as well. Right now it's at almost $500,000 funding shortage. We're expecting that to be expended over the next 2 years. Can you all hear me okay?
Pretty good.
I can hear you.
Barbary Woods, a $12.8 million project. This is all drainage fund, and it's currently at a $2.7 million shortage. Yeah, just phase 1 as well. Earhart Street, $17.8 million. 7.8 is coming from drainage fund. The rest is the CDBG MIT grant. Right now it's fully funded. Windermere is a $7.7 million project. This is also all drainage fund. 4.6 million is allocated. Right now we have a funding shortage of 3.1 million. King Hugie Street, $16 million project, 11.8 of which is funded. We have a funding short of around 4.1 million. 8.5 of that is coming from the drainage fund, and the rest is grants, really grants and reimbursement from CWS. Concourse Street Pump Station, that's an $8.8 million project. We currently have 5.9 million allocated in the drainage fund, and it is a $2.8 million shortage right now. For Jackson is $11.5 million project. We only have $4.6 million allocated to this right now. Some of it is the Cooper River Bridge tip, and the rest is the drainage fund. $6.8 million funding shortage right now. I don't think this is a kind of cost ever, right? Yeah.
This is a relatively early estimate.
Yeah, it's a relatively early estimate as well, so we're not sure that that's the final cost. Just to keep that in mind. Glen Connell Culvert, this is the one that we just allocated out of the drainage fund. We're expecting 1.3 million from the county, and the drainage fund will pick up 1.5. I know that they're currently negotiating with the county right now for some type of MOU. And so this is a summary of all our current projects. You can see it's $2.8 million, $100 million, sorry. And just a summary. And all the starred ones are the ones that are currently underfunded.
Amy,
Yes.
do you have a sheet like this, I guess, that also summarizes each project that's underfunded? In other words, what's the total?
Yes.
I understand that Cooper Jackson is very preliminary, but if we added up all the red asterisks, what would that total be?
I will show you that slide in just a second.
Thank you.
And then I just did, I had this for you last year as well, just funding by sources of the $200 million worth of projects that we have. So it's interesting, 80.6 million of that is grants. A lot of that is the State Infrastructure Bank.
Amy, looking at the local option permit income, is there any other ways we can increase that at all? That's a hard number, we're locking it up.
Well, that's just what we have reserved. So we do get funding every year from that, but it's not a substantial. That's many dollars.
Yeah, but we need to encourage people to go on drinking more. There was a police officer who got awarded for 151 DUI arrests in 1 year. So maybe more mini bottles could be considered.
So then we have the projections for the next 5 years. As you can see right now, with the projects the way they are currently funded, we'll end up in 2026 with a fund balance of $29.2 million. We do have a reserve policy in there. It's 50% of next year's revenues. It's regular revenues. That would be taxes, business licenses, and interest income. Just because we feel like we need to at least reserve some funding every year to make sure in case we have something happen like a pandemic or something like that again, that we're. So we do have that in there, but we don't have a formal policy. So we might want to think about some type of formal policy for that. Any questions on that slide?
So Amy, that's go back to it for just a second. The bottom line there, and in fact, it says cumulative available to spend. So just easy understanding at 2022 estimate, we have, you estimate $3.2 million to spend on other things.
That's right.
And by the end of 26, we'd have 29, almost $30 million to spend on new projects or to cover the shortfalls or some combination thereof, I guess.
Yeah, so I've actually slid in the underfunded projects so you can see what it does to the drainage fund in the next upcoming slides.
Okay, great.
So our underfunded and unfunded projects, Councilmember Waring, this is a slide you were asking about. So these are all the current projects that we have allocated in the drainage fund. That's the additional amount that we need. It's $28.4 million.
28 million.
Yeah, what did I say? I'm sorry.
28.4.
$28.4 million. Did I not say it?
Yeah.
So Amy, how does that 28.4 tie into available?
So, move forward.
Okay.
So if we covered all of the costs with a drainage fund of those underfunded projects, you'll see what it does to the current cumulative available to spend. So really by the end of 2026, we would only have $3.3 million to allocate to new projects.
That's after making up for the underfunded projects. All
right, the
28.4 million you showed us just a slide before. We'd still have 3.2 million this year and
nothing
next year, but 2.7 the year afterwards and so forth.
That's right.
And that's if we don't get any money from anywhere else.
That's right.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
So let me go back to, sorry, I should have mentioned this. So in all of those unfunded or the underfunded projects, I put also ways that we could potentially cover the cost of those, not, without the drainage fund having to cover them. So the Market Street drainage project, we could use tourism fees for that. The Church Creek, we have the Church Creek TIF, Forest Acres. We have some local option money that we could apply towards that. Barberry Woods, there's, we can look for more NIF grants, and there's also the mid on Johns Island. King Hugie Street has more potential grants, and Cooper River Bridge, TIF, Windermere, and Concord are really just a drainage fund. And Cooper Jackson drainage, we could utilize the Cooper River TIF or also look for a CDBG MIT grant. Sorry, I meant to point that out.
And those options are pretty real.
A lot of them are, yes.
Yeah.
So let me also say in this right here, the local option the mini model money for Forest Acres, I already included that. So that project is not included over here because we can cover that with local options. So it's not part of the drainage fund at all. So I've already covered that with that funding. So if we can allocate other funding sources, there'd be obviously more funding available for new projects. Like I said, we could utilize tourism fees for the Market Street Drainage Project, Cooper River Bridge TIF funding for both the King Hugie Street and Cooper Jackson drainage improvements, plus any possible grants that we might get. But these are real, like grants are, we might get them, might not. We already have allocated 3.6 million in drainage funds for the Church Creek project, and the additional funding that we needed of 500,000. So if we decided to bond for that, we could cover all of Church Creek with a TIF bond and not utilize drainage funds. That would put that back into the drainage fund. And if we did that, we'd get $17 million back to the drainage fund over the next 5 years.
Well, I think that's been a stated goal, Councilmember Waring. I know it's stated this on numerous occasions in the past, that if we have the opportunity to utilize some TIF funding, so we could use the drainage fund in those areas of the city that don't have a TIF district, it really helps to multiply or expand the drainage fund in a way, doesn't it?
I couldn't agree more, Mr. Mayor.
So I am expecting information from the county on the TIF. So in the next couple of months, I should be able to come back and let you know where we stand with all the TIFs, and we can have that conversation.
That would be good.
So then some of the unfunded projects with cost estimates is the DuPont Waku improvements, areas 1 through 4 and 5 through 10, which another possible funding source for that would be West Ashley TIF. Central Park Womba basement is going to be drainage fund and possible grants if they're already out there. Broad and Lockwood knee wall, drainage fund and grants. Same with West Bonnie, Fort Royal. It's such a small project amount, we probably wouldn't find any grants for that, so that one most likely will have to be covered by the drainage fund. And then Lake Daughter and Long Branch, and NOAA grant application is a good possibility. The brick arch retrofit is also possible, SCDOT funding. And that's an additional $44 million for those projects. Yes, Councilman Murray.
Go back to Central Park, Womba. This goes back, I think this was either the January or February before COVID really laid in thick. There was a bond that was refunded that was going to save some cash flow. I thought we voted to take that additional cash flow and apply it to that Central Park, Womba Basin improvement.
We did do that. However, that's over a period of 10 years, Councilman Wary, so it's not going to fund it right away like you would need it to. So you would need to allocate funding for it now, because it was the savings over, I think, over a number of years. It wasn't, you don't get the savings all up front right away.
Oh, I understand, yeah. Right.
So
Bond was refinanced. I'm not sure there was ever a vote to allocate.
they talked about it in council. I just don't remember if we did a formal vote, but we did talk
I think
about
we need to go back and check the minutes. I actually thought we took a formal vote.
We voted.
it. Okay.
I think we need,
I want to check it. I'm happy to allocate it right now. It looks like we have the ability to do that. But I do believe there was a lot of discussion about it, but I don't think we
But even
officially.
so, it would be, you see, you really wouldn't have that funding in place until the end of the bond. So it's, we can reserve that, but it's still, you need to allocate it in order to get the project done right away.
All right, great. Allocate.
Yeah, because it's only been, what, 10 years since the study almost?
It was in either 2019, I think it's 2019. Hold up, check.
We think 2019, Councilmember Gregory, but we're checking.
The funds were allocated for the study, I think, in 2014.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm sorry.
And it took that long to get to doing it.
Anyway, okay. You on a roll, Amy. I don't want to take you off of your roll. So.
I'm almost done with my role. So additional potential projects also are the Alberta Long Lake area drainage improvements, the VA hospital drainage lift station, MUSC pump station upfit, and the Bennett Street pump station, all for about 27.5 million. And, you know, there could be some TIF or contributions from the hospitals for those projects as well.
And just while Amy's talking through numbers too, I mean, many of these things, of course, are very round, approximate numbers at this point, because there's a lot of uncertainty before you've actually designed a project for cost. So things like the MUSC pump station upfit, the Alberta Long Lake, I mean, those are probably plus or minus 50% at least in terms of accuracy at this point in time.
It says very preliminary cost estimates. I should have pointed that out.
And we haven't talked about it this way. We can talk about it later if it's better, but sort of the same question revolves around like, why do we have underfunded projects? And there's a number of different reasons. Some of them are for that reason, that there was an allocation by council prior to a design coming up with a project estimate. That's like Cooper Jackson is very similar to that, but there was a bond allocation amount before a design was put together. So there was not a firm cost number. Some of them are increases in scope. Windermere looks like that, where we basically, instead of just adding in the new outfall, the best evaluation modeling shows also improving the existing outfall, which significantly adds to the project cost, but shows a much better scenario for flood improvement. And then some of them, which you're seeing in Church Creek, Forest Acres, those are the construction cost increases that we've been seeing in the last year and a half that have been running on civil work, anywhere between 10 and 20% increases. On civil mechanical, anywhere from 20 to 80% cost increases. And those are hard numbers to have budgeted for with any kind of realistic contingency. So that's kind of where we're sitting. And I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that the reason that we can keep any of the projects moving forward with what we're seeing in the current cost environment is because of how like careful and thorough we have been in our budgetary work for these projects. That basically BFRC and Amy and Matt have actually made sure we have contingencies and half capacity to be able to adjust to changing conditions as these projects come on this 5-year planning horizon. So I do want to caution us, it's good to add projects into the pipeline to make sure we don't get slow periods. But it is important, especially with how much, again, continued uncertainty it is for the next year or two, that you know, the guidances are anything from we'll start a recession in the next 9 months to we will continue to see out of control logistics issues for the next 2 years. And Charleston, of course, has its own excitement with the building environment and the amount of number of people moving here. So it's good to allocate, but it is also important to retain some flexibility for conditions changing. Because the worst case scenario is to think you're going to build a project and then not be able to build a project because something changes. So just quick background information. We can talk about any of that in more detail if anyone wants to later. I don't want to sidetrack the financial part of the presentation too much.
The other thing I had is just additional other projects that we have been talking about too, and that's the Highway 17 to Highway 61 off ramp, flooding improvements, more Church Creek project phases and Barbary Woods phase 2. That's really all I had in terms of where we are with the drainage fund.
So
Maybe
maybe
could
back
you go back to the previous screen? Before that one, the one that has the Womba on it.
Yeah.
Yes. Just a question to Matt. Matt, over the last year or so, we have been talking to the community about the various phases that this project would have to go through. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't that first phase the design phase? Or we design before we implement the phases?
No, you're correct, Councilman. We've done a conceptual evaluation, the modeling work and some preliminary engineering work for the basin, but the next step is the design and permitting of likely project areas 1 and 2 within the basin.
And what would that cost?
It's a good question. The approximate, well, not the approximate, the cost estimates we had back in 2020 for, I'd have to pull the exact number, just over $500,000 for design and permitting. I suspect we'll see probably 750,000 to 800,000 at this point.
Okay, all right, because that's a very, very important project that we've been dealing with for some time. And just to my colleagues, I really think that that's one at this point that we need to prioritize. While we got the funding for the study in 2015, it took us 4 years just to get that. Of course, it was under a totally different leadership in the stormwater department, but still, it's been some time, and I think we've got to try and do something to make sure that this project moves forward, because it has been quite a bit of time on it.
Time to move forward. I think we all concur on that, Councilmember Gregory. So
Thank you, Mayor.
along those lines, if you'd go up one more slide where it talks about Calhoun Street, no, the other way, I guess. The other.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh. One more. The Alberta Long Lake area drainage improvements. And I think, Matt Fountain, did that also include trying to improve the conveyance down Calhoun Street?
Mayor, yes, this is to try to divert some of the water from Calhoun Street down into the lake, as well as the surrounding neighborhood around the lake, and try to improve the outfall of the lake to handle that additional water out into the river there.
So if you were to answer that same type question that Councilmember Gregory had, and the next design phase of this basin of Alberta Long Lake and Calhoun Street and the neighborhoods nearby, what would that break out to be approximately? How much would we need just to get a project conceived and designed?
So that's a good question, Mary. The Central Park Womba area, we have done that. We had done, as Councilman Gregory mentioned, back in 2019, 2020. We spent roughly $300,000 working through the modeling and the concept work and the preliminary engineering to get to a better design and permitting number and construction number. On the Calhoun Alberta Long Lake, it was identified as part of the Calhoun West preliminary engineering, but it wasn't investigated to that level. It was more identified as a shorter term project approach. So we'd have to go through that preliminary engineering work first before we could finalize design and permitting and then construction. I hate trying to come up with a conceptual engineering without negotiating. It depends what firm we select to do the work and a number of other things, but for a project that scale, I would say roughly $500,000, but it's gonna depend on how we scope it and how complicated the work ends up being, but roughly $500,000. That would not get us to a construction-ready permitted construction set. It would get us to a firmer cost estimate and idea of what final permitting and construction documents we would want to do.
And that would probably run you another million or so, I would bet.
Yes, yeah, that's about what I would say off the cuff without knowing what the exact final design will be. That's a good ballpark.
Right. And that one, by the way, it's mentioned here, y'all, that that project could also be funded with TIF funds. That is, that little section of Calhoun Street is in the Horizon or West Edge TIF district. Okay, so Amy, if you don't mind going back now to the one that you show $18 million. One more, so, or 17. That would add approximately $17 million back to the drainage fund over the next 5 years, right? If you did those things. And so how much of the drainage fund do we have over the next 5 years? You know, I guess that was on one of your spreadsheets before.
That's the 3.3. So you see in 23, we wouldn't have anything. That's covering all those other projects though. And then.
So and let me make sure I'm following you, Amy. So these are cumulative, right? So basically in 2023, you're using the available amount from 2022 to cover
That's right.
2023 projects. So at the end of the 5 years, you have 3.3 that could have been allocated across those other years.
So really can't really do anything until 2024.
Well, yeah, but what I was trying to get is some rough total, like if over the next 5 years, you have this 3.3 plus the 17,
Right.
you really have $20 million
Right.
for new stuff, right?
That's right.
And so now if you go back to the potential new projects and you got $44 million there, but 20 of it is Lake Dotterer Long Branch, which is an important project. But a lot of that area is Charleston County, not City of Charleston. And I believe Dale Morris and has been working with NOAA, and so has Matt Fountain, to talk about getting some funding from them. So just putting Lake Dotterer aside, we're not too far away. And I would take out the brick arch, $3.5 million, because y'all, I got to tell you, I've had direct conversations with Christy Hall about this project. She's very supportive of it. We've already spent a good bit of money on it, and she has promised me she will help us fund that, continuing that retrofit, because it's about 70% of the roads over those brick arches are in fact SCDOT roads. And she acknowledges that, and she tells me that she's willing to help with that. So if you take the brick arch aside and you take the Lake Dotterer aside for right now, because we've got to seek other funding, you about got enough funding to do the rest of it. Does that make sense?
I will note that Mayor, just real quick, that the brick arch money was assumed that 3.5 is more like a matching amount to a potential funding source from someone else. Just to be clear, that's not enough. The 3.5 is not anywhere near enough to do all the remaining arches. just for clarity.
That's right, but I asked her for 20 million.
And that would go a lot further, yes.
So-
Mr. Peter, I got a couple follow-up questions, if I may.
Yes, sir.
So Matt and Amy, on the West Pawnee area in Fort Royal, what stage are we in with those two projects?
So West Pawnee has a conceptual evaluation where we've done the basic modeling work. Now the next step would be to come back and do actual design and permitting. The Fort Royal project has a conceptual idea, but that one will revolve around where we're able to obtain basic gratis or free easement dedication. If we're able to get free easement dedication, we can move to design and permitting. If we're not, we have to look at condemnation options, which may change the cost on the project. I don't have an appraisal yet for those properties.
And for everybody's edification, Fort Royal is a street in West Pawnee subdivision. The West Pawnee area is this property that's over in Old Town Acres, Gilmore Street, Bamboo Street, West Pawnee Place. So it's not West Pawnee subdivision. It's on the other side of West Pawnee. And this is the West Pawnee area is the property that impacts this sort of 1980s developed subdivision in which the streets is higher than the folks' front and backyards. And there's been a huge flooding problem. We send out tractor trailer size pumps when we have major storms over there to pump out the water that gets into the adjoining property area, impacts the whole neighborhood. And we did a study on that. So we have an idea of that. We allocated the study money for that. How long would it take for that project from start to finish back?
So the recommended route from the evaluation involved basically laying new pipe down Ashland over to Old Town Road. The question will be if DOT has any issues with that connection and how much modeling they require for it. If DOT is cooperative and thinks that's a reasonable approach, we'd probably be looking at, normally I would say a year for design and permitting. Right now, I might say a year and a half because most of the firms are really stretched. And then construction on something like that would be another 6 months to 12 months.
And then finally, Amy, you mentioned that grant money would not be available for the Fort Royal project, probably not, but what grants are we thinking about for West Pawnee?
So there's always an interesting thing with grants, right? That we try to find the project that fits the grant best to give us our best opportunity for funding rather than the project that needs money the most, which is a challenge sometimes, which is why we like the flexibility of the drainage fund where we can. We have a few projects that are reasonable options for the current style of South Carolina rural infrastructure agency money, the SCRIA money. There's also likely to be an ARPA round that they are still trying to figure out how to fund, which for slightly larger projects will be a good opportunity, like something the size of West Pawnee or Windermere, or that aren't kind of traditional cost benefit projects that would be eligible for something like BRIC or HMGB because they don't have that kind of large scale property damage side of equation that FEMA or FEMA for most of the grants right now want to see. Those are the most likely.
So, and then just for clarification, just the point the mayor has brought out about we may have this $20 million available, but that's not available in 2023. Exactly. That's available in 2020, 2024, 2026.
It's a mix over time through 2026. A lot of the TIF option funding, we can look at more detail if we needed to, but it's a stretch over those years, certainly.
Yeah, so it's a stretch from 2023 to 2026.
Right. So like it's not evenly distributed over those years, but it's something like an even distribution over those 5 years.
But to your point, and I think it's important for the committee to understand, we don't need to stop and not do anything with these possible projects. We need to continue with these projects and get them into the pipeline. So a bad analogy of a pipeline, but we need to get them into on the drawing board and start the process of these projects starting.
Yes, that's right, because basically what you don't want to have from an efficiency standpoint, what you don't want to happen is where you finish all of your construction projects, then you start designing your next set of projects, because one, design is cheaper than construction generally, so your cash flow starts to get very crazy looking. And then two, you have that depending what level of design we're talking about, 2 or 3 year period of design and permitting where nothing is actually getting built. So it's much smoother to have a few projects in design each year and a few projects in construction each year, and kind of as things finish construction, the next set starts construction, as things finish design, the next set starts design. I think you've all probably seen, and I've got it if we need to share it, but the kind of the green and blue sign graph looking document of our existing design and construction projects by year, where we are and where we do show basically in 2024, we start to have not very many things left in design. We're still constructing up through 2025. But in 2026, our construction starts to taper off. So yes, you want to have some things in design in 2023 and 2024, so that you'd be ready to build new things again in 2025 and 2026 at the very least.
Hey, Matt, this is Dudley. I think you said for the Central Park, we're talking about $1 million for design and permitting. Did I hear that correctly?
So Councilman, I think for Central Park, if we're talking, normally I talk about it as project areas 1 and 2, which are the, and I have presentations, all of this, if anybody wants refreshers on what any of the projects are, because I know it's a lot of different projects for everybody to keep in their head. Project areas 1 and 2 are the kind of the main canal that comes down between Wimbledon and Laurel Park and kind of runs DME apartments and comes out. That's project areas 1 and 2. I think the design work on that, because we already have the concept work, is likely to sit more in that $750,000-ish range. I've been talking to AECOM about updating the prices they did back in 2020 for that. There is some complicated environmental permitting through there most likely. So I think it will be probably a 2-year design and permitting process to get through that. But yes, roughly $750,000 over a 2-year period.
Okay, and the 5 million that we talked about for 10 years, if a half million for the next couple of years, may be able to take care of that.
Oh, from the bond refunding? Yeah, so
yes,
the $500,000 would be, if we kind of bump that up to $750,000, which, there again is available depending on what else is allocated and funded. That would get us through the next 2 years and would have more time then for other revenues or some of the TIF bonding to occur and basically provide the construction funding, which is the other 4 or 5 million, depending on what we end up finalizing design permitting in 2020.
so we're talking about potential construction for phase 1 and phase 2 in 2 years.
In roughly 2 years, yes.
I just want to make sure that the listeners are clear on this. That if we allocate, we're not going to see shovels in the ground in the next month or even a year. But as a prerequisite to get there, okay, we've got to do the designing and the permitting phase before we get to construction.
Yes, there's going to be a heavy component of Army Corps of Engineer permitting and DHEC permitting because of the tidal impacts on some of that system. And that tends to be an 18-month to 2-year permitting window right now. So I would expect at least 2 years to get through that permitting window is what I'm saying, yes.
Thank you.
So a couple of follow-up questions. on DuPont Wapu, didn't we have an agreement with the county, Matt Fountain, that they would pick up a percentage of the construction projects going forward? I know they participated with us on the concept plan we've got to so far, but weren't we talking with them about also helping us to some extent on the construction?
So DuPont Womba is a little bit different in that we did fund the design and permitting for the projects 1 through 4 out of the small project allocation funding. So that one is currently in design and permitting, again, only through 1 through 4. The county agreed on the design and permitting to 25% cost match based on their relative percentage of the project area. But they have not allocated or MOU'd us for any kind of construction funding at this point. Just that, in addition to the concept work, they also did the design and permitting cost match, but not yet a construction cost match.
Okay, but we certainly plan to ask them for it, right?
We will ask them. They also struggle with drainage project funding. They don't have the same level of dedicated revenue that we do into the drainage side of things. They have a much greater side in the road project, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see. We can ask, Mayor. I don't have as much confidence we'll get that level of funding, but we can certainly ask.
Okay. So back to Lake Dotterer for a minute. I know I said hold it to the side.
Mayor, before we go back to Lake, can I just ask one more question about Central Park?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, because of the areas in the Central Park Womba Basin also affects the county, okay? And I guess my question is, are we going to seek any county funding for the Central Park Womba Basin improvements? Because a large part of that is in the county.
Yeah, they committed to taking a portion of the basin and doing county projects. Matt probably can fill in more.
Yeah, that's correct, Mayor. So the county worked, basically the city, DOT, and the county all requested through the I honestly can't remember off the top of my head if it's the transportation sales tax or the CTC funding. I think it was the CTC funding actually requested, because that's why DOT would involve. Yeah, it was the CTC funding. We all requested what would be project area 4, which is the other side of the basin in between Fleming and Woodland Shores, Riverland.
Yes.
The county is managing that project. They have Thomas and Hutton on board as their design engineer with the initial funding they received from CTC. They're starting that permitting process now with the Corps for that side of the basin. So that was kind of the informal arrangement we had, was that the county would try to make progress on that side of the basin while the city made progress on the eastern side of the basin. There's still a matter of who does the phase 3 improvements, which are the eventual improvements in the Laurel Park community. Those are on the eastern side of the basin, but they're almost completely within the unincorporated county. But that you have to make the improvements in areas 1 and 2 and probably 4 before you can really do area 3 anyway. So there's a little bit of a potential future project still lingering. But that was the idea, was to split those two projects between us and the county to again, try to bring some county money into the area.
Gotcha. So back to Lake Dotterer.
Does that include the Howell Avenue project too, Matt?
So the Howell Avenue project, the county and city collaboratively applied in a greenbelt to acquire that piece of property. That was successful. We did acquire the property. The city has a request in the small project allocation, which we're not talking about today, but we will at Public Works Utilities likely at the end of the month.
I saw that.
To do the design work. So basically let the county, who has then agreed through a letter of intent to do the what we call mass grading or rough grading of the site. And then the city is supposed to come back after the county does the mass grading and do fine grading, landscaping, and any upgraded features we want to add and then maintain the site in the future.
Thank you.
All right. So now back to Lake Dotterer. That same kind of question, Matt. I know it's just a wild guess maybe, But what would be the conceptual design cost to take that to the next step? Not the $20 million projected for the whole thing, but just a piece that would get us to a project concept that we would be comfortable with.
Good question right now. That's a large project area with 4 separate projects enfolded within the project. Probably something like 1.5 million-ish to
Right.
get to a completed preliminary engineering process. It gets much more complicated as of the how much tidal impacted area there is there, modeling level, and then the improvements along the dam that would be necessary. But it could be cheaper than that. Most of the firms you would pick would be larger firms who have a lot of environmental experience for that, who tend to be the most expensive firms, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Yeah, professional engineering firms is challenging right now because they're all busier than they need to be.
Matt, that 20 million figure, that handles both sides. That handles the opening underneath Savannah Highway and underneath the Greenway and the dam side, I guess, on the other side of Lake Dotter. It's all of it. Is that correct?
Yes, it's the Greenway, Highway 17. There's one other relatively minor crossing that we'd have to improve south of Bud McConnell. The improvements to the dam to prevent Church Creek's water from coming into Dotter, and then probably an improvement to the outfall to let the water come out of Dotter into Church Creek if the tide falls faster. Okay. And again, that's a very rough number, Councilman. That's why it's sort of so round. It's 20 million. I don't know until we look more at that improvement under 17. It's just hard to know what our options are. If it ends up being where we can jack and bore something, that's not that expensive. If we have to be, again, not that expensive in comparison to open cutting 17 and redirecting traffic and trying to add box culverts, which is very expensive.
Okay, thank you.
That's similar to what we did with the Forest Acres Phase 1 with San Andrews Boulevard. If anyone remembers that project, that was an open cut with a redirection of traffic into different lanes.
That's not good.
Right, it gets more challenging. That would be under Highway 17.
Yeah.
So DOT would not like that approach, which is why we'd have to look to see what we could jack and bore instead. I just don't know enough without doing real design work or something like that to make a good answer.
All right. Any other questions from council members?
Mr. Mayor, I do. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to jump in about 3 minutes to do something at the Gill Yard. And then I have to jump right back. But one seed I wanted to plant, Amy, this is based on if you took out the TIF money and grant monies on all these projects you've shown us, obviously we need more revenue to get these things done. Have we looked at the possibility of issuing a drainage bond for some of these, for these deficiencies?
We haven't yet, but that is another option for us as well.
You see, my thing about interest rates definitely going to go up, and will go up probably 2 or 3 more times this year. CPW is coming into us, I think, at Tuesday's meeting, asking for some, Mr. Mayor, $170 million+ for capital projects. To me, it seems like we may need to increase the drainage fees, assign some of those dollars to a drainage bond. We're still living off of some projects up to 2012 drainage bond, Amy. Is some of that money for Forest Acres?
Right.
That's the first bonding project I voted on, ladies and gentlemen, when I came on the council. I think it was February of 2012, okay? I've been on council all of a month or so. And we still living off of those projects. Voted on the money for Forest Acres, and now Matt gets to get bid projects and things like that. I think the time has come for us to have another drainage bond. If that means we have to increase drainage fees, to do that. But delaying these projects, the 17 million that you may be referring to, Mr. Mayor, when you look at cost overruns, in particular in this post-COVID environment, that 17 million may not be there in 2026, just due to cost overruns. We need $1 in hand, in fact, today to do the projects for tomorrow. 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I don't know that interest rates will be any lower. I think we need to try and create the revenue stream to support a bond, a drainage bond that will take into account the deficiencies on a number of these projects that will allow Mr. Fountain and his team and to get these things designed and get the project rolling. 2026, when we know we don't have the money now, 2026 would be poor planning, waiting for I guess grants and something to fall from the sky. We know some of the tools we have now. So anyway, I'll talk about that maybe when I come at you all. I'm believe it or not, Mr. Mayor, I'm the secretary, and so I have to get the minutes approved. So then I'll jump right back. This is far more important than obviously get y'all meeting, but I promise to do it, so I'll do it and jump back. But
So
you all
you're
can talk about
zooming out and zooming back in a little bit? Is that?
I will. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna zoom out and zoom right back in.
Okay, we'll see you shortly.
Thank you.
So, Amy, with that thought in mind, you had that bond from 2012, right? And it was based on a couple of mills, right? And the debt has been paid down on that a little bit. What is our capacity if we just kept those couple of mills dedicated to drainage projects to do another bond? Do you know?
I don't, but I can get that. So that's what I was gonna tell Councilmember Waring, that we can work on that just to see what our current, with our 4 mills that we currently have dedicated to drainage, do with that, taking into consideration the bond that we're currently paying. So I'll just get back to all of you on that. Okay.
Well, that's a good chore to do, but, and I don't know how long Councilmember Waring is going to be gone. But I was just getting ready to say, even with the approximate $20 million over the next few years, the 17 from, making up those shortfalls from other funding sources that you mentioned, and then the little bit of residual 3 million, that I think it's past time, Councilmember Gregory, that we go ahead and commit. I'd commit this whole 4.8 million listed here to Central Park, Womba improvements. And then with all due respect to the West Ashley TIF, I don't think that's going to be a viable funding source for the doo-wop projects, because we have both Sumar and Citadel Mall improvements that we need to be funding out of that West Ashley TIF. So I think if you just went ahead and committed to the areas 1 through 4, that's 5.4 million, along with Central Park, the West Pawnee, the Fort Royal. I hear you, Mr. Fountain, keep a couple of $1 million in the place for the brick archways to keep that going and to have a little match, and then do $1.5 million each for Calhoun Long Lake concept, and design, and another $1.5 million for Long Branch. That's altogether 18.2 million. And that gets us going on particularly keeping some design going over the next couple of years, and sets aside some for construction. Now, it may be fine to do it through the bond funding, but I mean, from what I'm seeing here today, I don't see why we couldn't commit to those projects with what we've got in hand, given the refunding of the TIF districts and other things, hospitality funds that Amy has recommended. So what do y'all think about that?
You know what I think about it, Mayor? It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Nick, can I ask about one more question about the DuPont Walpole improvement? What areas are specific, areas 1 and 3?
And I can either pull up a map or I can verbally describe whatever is easier.
A verbal description would be fine.
Okay, so areas 1 through 4 basically are, even though it's 4 projects, it's really split into 2 areas. Area 1 kind of runs from one of Councilman Waring's main concerns, which is the kind of the Hazelwood neighborhood around the top of the Citadel Mall and then down to where it connects through under 526 and out. The other section of the project work, which I think is project area 3, maybe I have to actually check. It's project area 2, I'm sorry, is the area kind of down where it's on the south along Highway 17, running from DuPont, where the kind of old car dealership property is. It's vacant currently, from that parcel up past Orleans, kind of through the town and country, up under Sam Rittenberg, and then out to the same outfall system.
So that area, those areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, if I understand this properly, are going to have a greater impact on what the folks at Citadel Mall have been complaining about.
So they will be incredibly helpful for removing the current downstream kind of constrictions where the water from the upstream part of the basin can't get out under 526.
Yep.
We have spent quite a bit of time with the Citadel Mall Epic Center folks trying to figure out how we can build the portions that are on their property in a way that works with what they want to do in their development. We're currently going back and forth with them is one of the things their PUD kind of envisions as an alternative master drainage plan for the mall that lets them, basically it allows them to come in with different options as part of complying with our drainage improvement projects rather than like a traditional interpretation of the manual. So we've had a number of meetings with them and their engineering team. I think we're all getting to the same place where they're supportive of where we are, because it would basically help them then in turn know what they were going to need to do for building out the rest of their redevelopment plan. So the short answer is yes.
Yes.
That was the long answer.
No, so Mayor, that makes perfect sense to me because they've been complaining about us moving on the Epic Center, their project. And what Matt just confirmed for me is we take DuPont, Walpole improvements areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, like you mentioned, that would have a bigger impact on pushing them forward on their redevelopment plans for the Epic Center. I think that's just so important for us to recognize and appreciate if we include that project as opposed to what you just said, not looking at areas 5 through 10 yet. So we would have DuPont Walpole areas 1 through 4, Central Park, West Pawnee, Fort Royal, and some money for the brick arch retrofit.
Yes, sir.
I support that 100% there.
And design for both Long Branch and Calhoun West.
And Mayor, when you're saying Calhoun West, you mean the Alberta Long Lake Calhoun Street component?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just making sure.
I'm on board with that.
Yeah. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are the areas that we know of. We've been talking about them for too long. And I know they'll be in different phases, so to speak. But as Matt has so well described, we have to keep things going in different buckets at the same time, design and permitting and construction. So, but having said all that, I think Councilmember Waring's idea is spot on, and that we should look into another bond, because we all know there are other expenses that are going to escalate and present themselves to us, particularly hopeful I am that we move forward with the PED phase design and engineering for the perimeter wall protection, and that's gonna, require some funding as well. So we haven't brought that into this equation, right?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. The only thing I'll caveat it all with a bond mayor is that, heavy spending is likely to not, heavy unallocated spending is not likely to occur till 2025 and 2026.
Right.
With where we are on current design capacity and construction capacity. And I think we have a lot of opportunity to do more design work in 2024 and 2025 to get us into more construction in 2025 or 2026. So
Right.
it's not a ridiculous time frame to bond if you're seeing rising interest rates, but just for looking at cash flow. I mean, I know the 2012 bond is nice to have money now, but that money has cost us an awful lot of money to hold on to for the last 10 years.
We just need to be really strategic about it because you also have to spend it within a certain amount of time. So we gotta make sure that our projects are far enough along that it makes sense to bond. So we're having a hard time with a little bit with the 2012 bond because we should have already had all that money spent. And these projects take so long to complete. So we just need to be kind of strategic about when we do bond, for all of those reasons. We want to have real, like, shovel-ready projects.
Yeah,
More so.
the battery is a good example of it
Mhm.
going right, where you're in
Yeah.
construction, you have a cash flow concern, you bond, and you can
Yeah.
spend that money immediately. That's a great way to do it.
So,
So I'm having a little trouble hearing y'all. In person really is better. But so are you saying that, I spouted off that list and just say it's 18.2 million. If we're able to cover that with the existing cash flow and rediversion, Amy, that you mentioned earlier, are you saying it's better to just proceed and then hold our fire on the bond until we really need it? Is that what I'm hearing?
yeah, yes. I mean, I understand interest rates, but if we could at least get the design, the upfront costs done first, so that when we do go for a bond, it's more for us to, when we're shovel ready, it would be better for us to do it that way.
Gotcha.
Because our
So
money,
it's not necessarily taking all of the, what we see as those project costs, because right now we're saying it's 4.8 million roughly for Central Park Womba for the whole project. So if we at least use some of the drainage fund to get to where we need to be to start construction, then you use the bond for the construction side of it.
otherwise the money will be worth less, is what you're saying.
Right.
And just even having said that, we will, in order to free up the 18 million, Mary, you will need to bond off the Cooper River Bridge TIF and the Church Creek TIF in the short run in order to free up that
So
18
there will
million.
be other, depending on what we do with those, because we were talking about doing a Cooper River Bridge bond sometime this year as well. And we need to, as soon as I get the TIF information, we can look at Church Creek to see what we could do with those. That would still free some things up. And we are applying for some grants and things like that as well. So there's other potential ways to put money back into the drainage fund other than those. It would just be better for us to wait until we're more shovel ready for the projects to get a bond.
Gotcha. I think that makes sense, don't y'all?
You don't want to go into debt earlier than you need to go into debt, what Amy's saying.
Yes.
Right.
Wait till you have to.
It sounds like a plan to me. Can we just move forward?
I think we can. Why don't we,
It's a council procedural question, I guess,
Yeah,
on
right.
what level of authority is needed. I mean, technically, each individual item can come to council for allocation as I bring contracts. I think the way we've done in the past is that the budget ad hoc committee has made a recommendation to council, and council has said, yes, we support the CIP. Therefore, Amy can adjust the CIP to show these numbers. Then when I bring a contract to council, we say this is within the currently allocated budget for this project. And it doesn't kind of bring back up the argument over which project should be funded necessarily.
So we do normally do it through the capital improvement plan. So we could do it however y'all want. we can slide all these projects into the current cash flow and kind of see where it makes sense to, which projects it makes more sense to do in which years if you want, and kind of come back with that as well.
Sounds like a plan.
I like the idea.
And usually we talk ad hoc about the capital improvement plan in July. But maybe we could, and then would bring that forward, but you all, that, it doesn't matter, however we all want to do it, it's fine.
Some of the items will have to be. But depending on where we want to do the Central Park. Well, it doesn't have to be sooner, depending on how fast you want to start, it has to be sooner.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Do we need a motion
We
there?
want to start fast.
Do we need a motion?
Not really. This is an advisory committee. But if we have consensus, what I'm hearing is we'll prepare a proposal, if you will, to go to council that outlines what Amy proposed on that other page as far as covering those budget shortfalls with the hospitality fund for Market Street, for example, and the TIF money for this project or that. That's one side of it. And then the other side of it would be to list these projects: Central Park, Duwop 1 through 4, West Pawnee, Fort Royal, Brick Arch, Design for Calhoun, Design for Long Branch, that we would concur that there's an allocation for those projects. And then we'll ask Mountain separately to think about timing and scheduling and all like that he's a master at. Does that sound like a consensus? Anybody got an objection to that?
Sounds good to me.
Good to me, Mr.
Come on.
Mayor, the only thing I would point out is if we do, and this is something for Councilor Gregory to consider, I guess. If we have a concern with how long the process takes to normally go through the CIP because of Central Park, I mean, we could bring the design and permitting task for Central Park ahead of the CIP, and council would just do it as an allocation at the time of that one task coming through, which would give us then more time to deal with, progressing the rest of the CIP through the normal budget ad hoc process in July without holding up that one project. So we're not trying to rush the rest, basically.
I trust your genius.
Was that a hallelujah?
That's a hallelujah.
I think that it's easier for me to potentially.
Yeah.
Okay. But in the meantime, Amy, it would be good to look at the bonding capacity just to know where it stands right now.
Yep, I can do that.
Yep. All right. Well, good. Anybody got anything else to add for the good of the order here? I'm sorry, Councilmember Waring had to sign off, but we're recorded, so he can go back and listen, and then if he has something he wants to add, he can certainly do that.
Maybe the only thing I'll throw up here real quick, which one of the things to note, right, is that we are putting a lot of impact on the Cooper River Bridge TIF with that proposal. We do have some decent probability for grants on the projects that would also be TIF projects. So it's not a guarantee, but if we start spending money that we don't reserve the ability to bond for off the Cooper River Bridge TIF, and then those grants don't come through, the King Eugene project and the Cooper River Bridge projects, the Cooper Jackson projects would stall. So just it's probably a cautionary point to note to either reserve some of that bonding capacity for those projects when you're considering other bonds, or to understand that without a grant, they'd be stalled until a different bond were issued or a different funding mechanism became available.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, I'll call you on the small projects because I thought that Westchester drainage issue was one that we had considered.
Yeah, we can certainly take a look at it, Councilman Gregory.
Thanks.
The small project info comes back to Public Works Utilities probably the end of the month, so now is definitely the right time to bring it up if you have one that I'm missing or haven't put in there in the right detail.
Yeah, I'd like to bring one more on the island if we can. Small project. That's Westchester. I'll talk to you and Keith about it.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. All right. Anybody else? Ross, you've been awfully quiet.
Don't encourage them.
I'm banking my words for the next meeting.
All right. Good.
Thanks, everybody.
Anybody else? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Matt. A lot of work went into this, I know, so appreciate it very much, but I think we have a path forward. We'll get together soon. I appreciate everybody's input and advice.
Take care. Thanks.
All right.
Already on May 26th.
What's that?
I said, we'll see everyone on May 26th. So we have
It's
more
on-
fun to talk about.
It's on my calendar.